I didn't think 6 inches of concrete could bankrupt somebody. But apparently, when that concrete belongs to a $2 million forever home sitting on the wrong side of a property line, things get real expensive real fast. And look, I know how that sounds. People hear this story and immediately assume I'm some bitter old guy screaming at clouds over a couple inches of dirt. But trust me, this wasn't about dirt. This was about entitlement, the kind that shows up wearing designer hiking boots and talking about simplifying life, while spending more on a backyard fire pit than most people spend on a used truck. My family's property sits out in western Montana, narrow strip of wooded land my dad bought back in the late 80s when nobody wanted acreage that far from town. 5 acres, mostly pine and cedar, little creek running through the back, no fancy gate, no vineyard, no luxury barn conversion nonsense, just quiet land that had been in our family for decades. The corners were marked with old iron survey pins hammered deep into the ground long before GPS apps started convincing people they were land surveyors. Then the Harpers moved in next door. Ethan and Claire Harper, former Seattle tech people, remote workers chasing the whole off-grid country life fantasy they'd been feeding their Instagram followers for years. You know the type? Every photo looked like a Patagonia ad, mason jar coffee, expensive flannel shirts, captions about escaping toxic city energy while standing in front of a brand new Rivian truck worth more than my first house. They bought the neighboring parcel and immediately started building this giant modern farmhouse thing. Steel beams, concrete foundation, floor-to-ceiling windows, probably had a heated dog shower somewhere in the blueprint. Construction crews rolled in every morning before sunrise, excavators tearing through trees, concrete trucks backing up the dirt road nonstop. Real money was being spent out there. At first, I stayed out of it because honestly, not my business. People build houses every day. But one afternoon, I was walking the property line checking storm damage after a heavy rain, and something looked off. The western corner of their foundation was sitting way too close to my side of the line, like uncomfortably close. So I grabbed the old survey map from my truck, walked to the corner marker, brushed away wet leaves, and there it was. The iron pin exactly where it had always been. And their foundation? Yeah, 6 inches over. Not feet. Inches. Technically tiny, legally catastrophic. I remember standing there staring at that concrete edge thinking, there's no way they actually poured this without checking. So I walked over to talk to Ethan. He was standing near the framing crew holding one of those stainless steel coffee tumblers people somehow always carry when they want to look important. I told him the foundation crossed onto my property. He didn't even look concerned. Guy literally smirked, pulled out his phone, opened some property line app, and started zooming around the satellite map with his finger like he was commanding troops in a war movie. According to this, he said, we're fine. I almost laughed. I told him those apps can be off by 10 feet easy, sometimes worse. Actual property boundaries come from licensed surveys and physical markers, not an app downloaded between fantasy football updates. But Ethan waved me off like I was some clueless hillbilly scared of technology. He said the old markers probably shifted over time, and besides, construction was already underway. Then Claire walked over, all fake polite at first, but I could already hear the irritation in her voice. I mean, it's 6 inches, she said, arms crossed. Surely we can be reasonable adults about this. That sentence right there? That was the moment I knew this was going to turn ugly. Because people who say be reasonable usually mean let us get away with something. I told them the same thing I'd tell anybody. Move the foundation now before the house goes any further up. It would cost them money, sure, but not nearly as much as waiting. Ethan's whole expression changed after that. Smile disappeared. Jaw tightened. You could physically see the annoyance hit him. We're not tearing out a foundation over 6 inches, he snapped. That's insane. And there it was, the real issue. Not confusion. Not mistake. Pride. They genuinely believed money and momentum made them untouchable. And the crazy part? Construction kept going the very next morning like our conversation never happened. Framers showed up, roof trusses arrived. Walls started going vertical. Meanwhile, I'm standing there realizing these people had just gambled an entire luxury home on the assumption that I wouldn't push back. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people completely misunderstand how property disputes work, especially folks moving out from big cities into rural areas thinking land ownership is all casual and flexible. It's not. Out here, property lines are religion. According to standard procedure, when you're building a structure that close to a boundary line, you're supposed to verify the survey multiple times before concrete ever gets poured. Not after. Before. And I'm not talking about opening some cute little app with green lines floating over satellite images. I mean an actual licensed surveyor putting stakes in the dirt with legal measurements attached to them. From a legal perspective, the second they were notified about the encroachment and kept building anyway, the entire situation changed. Huge difference between an honest mistake and what courts call willful encroachment. That word matters. A lot. Because judges absolutely hate when somebody gets warned, ignores it, then later acts shocked when consequences show up carrying paperwork. But honestly, the legal side wasn't even the most interesting part to me. The psychology was. This is a psychological trap people fall into all the time once they've already invested serious money into something. The Harpers had already dumped hundreds of thousands into that house. Permits, contractors, materials, social media branding around their dream lifestyle. Emotionally, they were too committed to back down. So instead of stopping and fixing a small problem early, they convinced themselves I'd eventually cave because admitting they screwed up would have been too painful. Pride starts driving the decision-making, not logic. And once pride takes the wheel, people will risk unbelievably stupid outcomes just to avoid feeling embarrassed. The lesson here is small boundary violations become massive legal disasters when entitlement enters the equation, especially when one side mistakes kindness for weakness. So after that conversation, I figured maybe they'd cool off overnight and come back ready to handle things like adults. Nope. Next morning, I wake up to the sound of nail guns echoing through the trees like World War III had kicked off behind my property line. Framers everywhere, trucks hauling lumber in, crews moving fast like they were trying to outrun a hurricane. That's when I realized Ethan wasn't ignoring the problem because he thought he was right. He was ignoring it because he thought speed would protect him. Build the house fast enough, make it expensive enough, complicated enough, emotional enough, and eventually nobody would dare challenge it. And honestly, that strategy probably works most of the time. People hate conflict, especially legal conflict. Most neighbors would grumble for a week, maybe demand a little money, then roll over once attorneys get involved. Ethan was betting I was one of those people. Bad bet. I hired a real estate attorney named Russell Kane, older guy, calm voice, looked permanently disappointed in humanity. First thing he said after reviewing the surveys was, "Do not negotiate verbally anymore." That's when the whole thing shifted from annoying neighbor dispute to legal warfare. Russell sent them a formal cease and desist letter demanding construction stop immediately until the encroachment issue was resolved. Certified mail. Clean language. No drama. And their response? Pure arrogance wrapped in legal vocabulary. Their attorney wrote back saying the encroachment was de minimis, basically too small to matter, and that forcing demolition over a 6-inch overlap would be grossly inequitable. I remember reading that line twice and laughing in my kitchen because rich people always discover the concept of fairness right around the time consequences arrive. They also included an offer, $5,000 for a permanent easement, $5,000 for the legal right to keep part of a luxury home sitting on my family's property forever. It wasn't even the amount that irritated me most, it was the assumption behind it. They genuinely believed everything had a price tag if you waved enough cash around. Russell asked me what I wanted to do. I told him exactly this. If they'd listened the first time, I probably would have worked something out. But now, I want the court involved. So we filed suit. And let me tell you something nobody warns you about lawsuits. They move slower than winter molasses. Months started dragging by. Depositions, survey reviews, site inspections, legal filings stacked higher and higher. Meanwhile, the Harpers just kept living their best influencer life right next door like they were starring in some rural lifestyle documentary nobody asked for. Every week, Claire uploaded more pictures online. Handmade kitchen shelves, mountain sunsets, captions about finding peace in simplicity. Simplicity apparently included ignoring pending litigation attached to your foundation. Sometimes I'd see Ethan outside splitting firewood shirtless like he was auditioning for a cologne commercial, completely acting like the lawsuit wasn't happening. That confidence started getting under my skin a little, not because I doubted the case, but because they looked so sure the system would eventually bend around them. And here's the part people won't admit publicly. There were moments I questioned myself too. Because once enough people hear 6 inches, they start acting like you're crazy for caring. Friends would say stuff like, "Man, is this really worth all the stress?" Or, "Couldn't you just settle?" Even my brother told me, "You're technically right, but this thing's gonna consume your life." And for a while, he wasn't wrong. Lawsuits poison your mental space. Every letter ruins your morning. Every delay crawls under your skin. But then Russell showed me something important during discovery. Turns out the Harper's contractor had actually flagged the boundary issue early during excavation. There were emails, internal emails. One of them literally said, "Owner wants to proceed despite setback concern." The second I saw that sentence, the whole emotional equation changed. Because now it wasn't stubbornness anymore. It was calculated. They knew. They absolutely knew. And they kept building anyway because they assumed money would solve it later. From a legal perspective, that was catastrophic for them. Accidental encroachment might get sympathy. Intentional disregard? Judges hate that. Suddenly settlement talks started sounding different. Their attorneys stopped using words like minor oversight and started talking about practical resolution. Translation, they realized they were in trouble. But by then the house was finished. Massive black-framed windows, polished concrete floors, wraparound porch overlooking the trees. Gorgeous place, honestly. Which made the situation even crazier because every additional dollar they poured into that house increased the pressure on themselves, not on me. They were building leverage against their own future. Then came the court hearings. Ethan showed up looking exhausted for the first time since this whole thing started. Claire looked pale, anxious, constantly whispering to their attorney. Russell? Calm as ever. The judge was an older woman named Judge Holloway, sharp-eyed, zero patience for performative nonsense. And the second she realized the Harpers had ignored multiple warnings before continuing construction, the mood in that courtroom changed hard. You could feel it. Their attorney tried everything. He argued the encroachment caused no measurable damage. He argued demolition would create disproportionate hardship. He argued my refusal to accept compensation was unreasonable. Then Judge Holloway asked one question that basically detonated their entire defense. Were the defendants informed of the boundary dispute before substantial construction was completed? Their attorney hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely a second. But everybody in that courtroom felt it. Yes, Your Honor. That was it. Done. Because once intentional continuation entered the record, sympathy evaporated. The hearings stretched over weeks after that. Surveyors testified. Appraisers testified. Russell walked the court through every warning, every ignored letter, every opportunity they had to fix the problem before it spiraled. Meanwhile, Ethan started looking angrier every session, like reality itself had betrayed him. I'll never forget one exchange during cross-examination. Russell asked him, "Why didn't you halt construction pending a boundary verification?" Ethan actually sighed before answering. Because stopping construction would have been financially devastating. And there it was, the confession hiding inside the excuse. He gambled because fixing it early cost too much. The problem was losing later cost astronomically more. The final ruling came down almost 8 months after the lawsuit started. Packed courtroom. Heavy silence. Judge Holloway spoke slowly, methodically, the kind of tone that makes your stomach tighten before the actual words even land. She ruled the encroachment constituted willful negligence due to repeated warnings and continued construction despite known boundary disputes. Then she moved to damages. The court-appointed appraiser had determined the value of the required easement area wasn't based on raw land value alone. It was based on functional dependency. In plain English, that 6-inch strip had become legally essential to the existence of the structure itself, which meant its value skyrocketed. The court gave them 2 options. Option 1. Purchase a permanent easement from me for $75,000 plus all legal fees. Option 2. Pay an annual mandatory easement fee of $22,000 indefinitely. You could physically hear Claire inhale when the numbers landed. Ethan just stared forward like somebody unplugged his soul. Their attorney immediately argued the amount was punitive. Judge Holloway didn't even blink. The defendants proceeded after multiple warnings, she said. The consequences were foreseeable. Man, that line hit the room like a hammer. Because she was right. None of this came from bad luck. It came from arrogance layered on top of denial. After court adjourned, Ethan finally approached me in the hallway without the attitude. without the smug little half-smile he'd worn the first day we met. Guy looked wrecked. He asked if I'd reconsider a lower number. Said the judgment would financially cripple them after legal costs. And for a split second, just a split second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered standing in the mud beside that survey marker while he dismissed me like I was some idiot who didn't understand his own property. I remembered the continued construction, the ignored letters, the arrogance. So I told him the same thing he'd told me months earlier. We're too far into this to stop now. He didn't say another word after that. In the end, they paid everything. 75 grand for the easement. Nearly 20,000 in legal fees. Additional survey expenses. Recording fees. Revised property documentation. By the time the dust settled, that 6-inch mistake had cost them well over $100,000. And the craziest part? It all could have been avoided with one simple decision made early enough: respect the property line. Looking back now, the weirdest part of this whole mess isn't even the money. It's how preventable it all was. People hear lawsuit and immediately imagine two neighbors screaming at each other over tiny pieces of land like some reality TV episode. But that's not what this was. This was one bad decision feeding another until pride became more expensive than common sense. And honestly, I think that's why this story hits such a nerve online, because deep down everybody recognizes that type of person. We've all met somebody who mistakes confidence for competence, somebody who believes rules become optional once enough money gets involved. Ethan and Claire weren't evil people, not really. They were just completely trapped inside the fantasy they built around themselves. They wanted the dream homestead, the perfect life transition, the social media version of escaping the city. And once that image became part of their identity, admitting a mistake felt impossible. This is a psychological trap people fall into constantly. The more time, money, and ego someone invests into a decision, the harder it becomes for them to reverse course, even when warning signs are screaming directly in their face. And the scary part is, intelligent people are often the worst victims of it because they're confident enough to rationalize absolutely anything. From a legal perspective, though, the lesson is brutally simple. Property law does not care about your intentions, your aesthetic lifestyle, or how beautiful your house looks at sunset. Boundaries are boundaries. According to standard procedure, once you receive formal notice that you may be encroaching on somebody else's land, you stop immediately and verify everything. You do not push through. You do not assume the other person will cave later. You definitely do not continue construction hoping the size of your investment will emotionally pressure people into surrendering their rights. Courts see that all the time, and judges tend to react very badly to it. The lesson here is that small acts of entitlement become massive disasters when nobody checks them early. 6 inches turned into a $100,000 nightmare because somebody decided being corrected was more offensive than being wrong. And if I'm being honest, the money was never the satisfying part for me. What mattered was the principle. My father worked hard for that land. Those survey markers existed before Ethan and Claire ever dreamed about moving out there. Ownership means something, especially in rural communities where people still shake hands, honor boundaries, and expect basic respect from neighbors. To this day, the Harpers still live next door. We don't talk much. Occasionally, I'll see Ethan outside, and there's this strange tension in the air, like we both remember exactly how avoidable all of it was. But every single time I walk past that old iron survey pin still sitting exactly where it always has, I think the same thing. Arrogance is expensive, but documentation is forever.